What happens when Hollywood's most beloved humanitarian meets daytime television's most unpredictable host? You won't believe what unfolds when Angelina Jolie sits down with Kelly Clarkson for what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. The cameras were rolling, the audience was ready, but nobody could have predicted the explosive confrontation that would leave viewers stunned and one A-list celebrity storming off the set in disgust. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of The Kelly Clarkson Show was supposed to showcase Angelina Jolie's latest directorial project, a powerful documentary about refugee children in war-torn regions. The Oscar-winning actress and humanitarian had carved time out of her impossibly busy schedule to appear on the show, bringing with her years of experience working with the United Nations and countless stories of hope from some of the world's most dangerous places. What should have been an inspiring conversation about global awareness and human rights quickly transformed into something far more sinister. The tension was palpable from the moment Jolie walked onto the soundstage. Kelly Clarkson, known for her bubbly personality and seemingly genuine warmth, greeted her guest with the usual fanfare, but something felt different. The normally effusive host seemed distracted, almost dismissive, as she shuffled through her note cards with an unusual sense of urgency. Jolie, ever the professional, settled into her chair with the poise and grace that had made her one of Hollywood's most respected figures. But even she couldn't mask the slight confusion that flickered across her face at Clarkson's lukewarm reception. As the cameras began rolling and the familiar theme music faded, Clarkson launched into her opening remarks with what appeared to be her trademark enthusiasm. "We're here with the incredible Angelina Jolie, everyone," she announced to thunderous applause from the studio audience. But those watching closely could detect something artificial in her smile, something forced about the way she gestured toward her guest. Jolie responded with her characteristic humility, thanking Clarkson for having her and beginning to discuss the documentary that had brought her to the show in the first place. "This project means everything to me," Jolie began, her voice carrying the weight of genuine emotion. "These children have stories that need to be heard, voices that deserve to be amplified on platforms exactly like this one." She paused, looking directly at Clarkson with the kind of intensity that had made her such a compelling presence both on screen and in her humanitarian work. Their resilience in the face of unimaginable circumstances should inspire all of us to do more, to care more, to act with greater purpose in our daily lives. But instead of the supportive nods and follow-up questions that guests typically received, Clarkson's response was jarringly different. She leaned back in her chair, a slight smirk playing at the corners of her mouth, and delivered what would be the first in a series of increasingly hostile comments. "That's really beautiful, Angelina, but I have to ask, don't you think it's a little convenient how you always seem to find these causes right around the time you have a project to promote? I mean, the timing is pretty perfect, don't you think?" The studio audience fell silent. This wasn't the Kelly Clarkson they knew, the warm and supportive host who had built her reputation on creating safe spaces for celebrities to share their stories. Jolie's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but those familiar with her work knew the signs. This was the same steely resolve she'd shown when confronting warlords in refugee camps, the same unwavering strength that had made her such an effective advocate for the world's most vulnerable populations. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand what you're implying," Jolie responded, her voice remaining steady despite the obvious provocation. "My work with refugees began long before I ever considered directing, and it will continue long after I stop making films. These aren't causes I pick up and put down based on my career needs, Kelly. These are real people facing real crises, and they deserve better than to have their suffering dismissed as a publicity stunt." Clarkson's response was even more shocking than her initial attack. She actually laughed, a cold, calculated sound that seemed to echo through the stunned studio. "Oh, come on, Angelina. We're all adults here. You're telling me that jetting around the world, staying in 5-star hotels while visiting refugee camps for a few hours, and then coming back to promote your movies isn't at least a little bit calculated? I mean, let's be honest about what's really happening here. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jolie's humanitarian work wasn't just a side project or a hobby, it was the defining mission of her life. She had spent nearly 2 decades working tirelessly with the United Nations, had been named a special envoy, and had dedicated countless hours and millions of her own dollars to causes that most people would never even hear about. To suggest that this work was somehow manufactured for publicity was not just insulting, it was a fundamental misunderstanding of who she was as a person. But Clarkson wasn't finished. As if sensing that she had struck a nerve, she pressed forward with even more venom. And let's talk about those adoptions too, while we're being honest. 3 children from 3 different countries, all adopted right around major career milestones. I mean, the optics are just so perfect, aren't they? The caring Hollywood mom collecting children from around the world, like some kind of humanitarian trophy case. The camera caught Jolie's hands gripping the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white with the effort of maintaining her composure. This wasn't just an attack on her professional work anymore. This was a direct assault on her family, on her children, on the most sacred aspects of her personal life. The audience began to murmur uncomfortably, sensing that they were witnessing something that had crossed every line of decency and professional conduct. "Kelly," Jolie said, her voice now carrying a warning edge that anyone familiar with her advocacy work would recognize. "I think you need to be very careful about where this conversation is heading. My children are not props, and they're certainly not trophies. They're my family, and they deserve better than to be used as ammunition in whatever game you think you're playing here." But Clarkson had apparently decided that there was no turning back. The mask had completely slipped away, revealing something ugly and resentful underneath. "Game? This isn't a game, Angelina. This is about honesty, about calling out the performative nature of celebrity activism. You want to sit here and lecture America about caring more and doing more while you live in a completely different reality from the rest of us? While you have teams of handlers and publicists crafting your image as this perfect humanitarian saint?" The confrontation had escalated beyond anything anyone in the studio had ever witnessed. What had started as subtle digs had transformed into a full-scale character assassination, broadcast live to millions of viewers who had tuned in expecting nothing more than a pleasant chat about filmmaking and global awareness. Instead, they were watching one of Hollywood's most respected figures being systematically attacked by a host who seemed to have abandoned every principle of professionalism and basic human decency. Jolie's response revealed the steel that had made her such an effective advocate in some of the world's most dangerous places. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to apologize and redirect this conversation towards something productive," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Because, if you continue down this path, you're going to learn exactly why people who try to exploit human suffering for entertainment purposes don't fare very well when they come up against someone who actually understands what real courage looks like." The threat was delivered with the kind of quiet intensity that made it absolutely clear this wasn't an empty gesture. But as the cameras continued to roll and the audience held their collective breath, it became obvious that Kelly Clarkson had no intention of backing down from the confrontation she had initiated. In fact, her next words would push the situation beyond any possible point of return, setting the stage for what would become one of the most explosive celebrity confrontations in daytime television history. Clarkson's laugh this time was even more chilling than before, a sound that seemed to bounce off the studio walls and settle into the uncomfortable silence that had engulfed the audience. "Real courage?" she repeated, her voice dripping with mockery. "You want to talk about real courage, Angelina? Real courage is working 3 jobs to feed your kids, not flying first class to photo opportunities in war zones. Real courage is struggling to pay medical bills, not writing checks from your $100 million fortune and expecting praise for it." The personal nature of the attack sent shockwaves through everyone present. This wasn't just professional criticism anymore. This was a systematic attempt to dismantle everything Jolie had built her post-Hollywood career around. The cameras captured every micro-expression on Jolie's face as she processed what was happening. The slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was calculating her next move with the precision of someone accustomed to navigating hostile territory. "Kelly," Jolie said, her voice now carrying a dangerous edge that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "I'm beginning to understand what's really happening here. This isn't about my work or my family, or anything I've actually done. This is about something else entirely, isn't it? This is about your own insecurities, your own failures to use your platform for anything meaningful beyond selling products and generating ratings." The counterattack landed with devastating precision. Clarkson's face flushed red, and for a moment, her carefully constructed television persona cracked completely. "Failures? You want to talk about failures? Let's talk about your marriage to Brad Pitt, shall we? Let's talk about how that whole perfect family image fell apart the moment the cameras stopped rolling. Let's talk about custody battles and leaked court documents, and all the things that don't make it into your carefully curated humanitarian press releases." The mention of Jolie's personal struggles sent a visible shock through the studio. Several audience members actually gasped audibly, while others began shifting uncomfortably in their seats, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something that had crossed every conceivable line of professional conduct. The production staff behind the cameras exchanged panicked glances, but the show continued rolling, as if everyone was too stunned to intervene. Jolie's response revealed the full extent of her controlled fury. "You have no idea what you're talking about. And more importantly, you have no right to weaponize my children's lives for your entertainment. But since you want to go down this path, let's talk about failures, Kelly. Let's talk about using your show as a platform to tear down people who actually risk their lives to make a difference in the world. Let's talk about what it says about you that you'd rather attack someone's personal struggles than engage with the substance of issues that affect millions of people." But Clarkson had apparently decided that complete destruction was her only option. "Oh, spare me the sanctimonious lecture about making a difference. You know what makes a difference? Being honest with people instead of pretending to be some kind of saint while your own life is falling apart behind the scenes. Your kids are going to grow up and read about all of this, Angelina. They're going to see the court documents and the custody evaluations and all the things you don't want the world to know about." The attack on her children seemed to flip a switch in Jolie that transformed her from a defensive guest into something far more formidable. She leaned forward in her chair, her voice dropping to a level that made everyone in the studio strain to hear her words. "Kelly, you have just made the biggest mistake of your career. You think you can sit here and attack my children, exploit their privacy, and use their lives as weapons against me? You have absolutely no idea who you're dealing with." The threat wasn't delivered with raised voices or dramatic gestures. It was spoken with the kind of quiet certainty that made it infinitely more menacing. This was the voice Jolie used when confronting warlords and corrupt officials, the tone that had made her one of the most respected advocates in international diplomacy. The studio audience seemed to sense the shift in power dynamics, the way the confident aggressor had suddenly become the one who needed to be concerned about consequences. Clarkson, however, seemed completely oblivious to the danger she had placed herself in. "Who I'm dealing with? I'm dealing with an actress who's built a career on playing tough characters and wants everyone to believe she's actually tough in real life. But we all know the truth, don't we? Behind all the UN appointments and the humanitarian awards, you're just another Hollywood celebrity whose personal life is a disaster and whose public image is carefully managed by a team of publicists." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Jolie's response demonstrated exactly why she had earned the respect of world leaders and international organizations. "You want to see who I really am, Kelly? You want to understand what separates someone who actually does the work from someone who just talks about it on television? I've sat across from men who've committed genocide and maintained my composure. I've negotiated with terrorists for the release of aid workers. I've held dying children in refugee camps and promised their mothers I would tell their stories to the world." Her voice began to rise, not with anger but with the kind of passionate intensity that had made her such an effective advocate. "And you think you can intimidate me with some tabloid gossip and personal attacks? You think you can diminish the work that I've dedicated my life to by throwing around accusations and innuendo? You have fundamentally misunderstood not just who I am, but what real power actually looks like. The shift in the room's energy was palpable. What had started as Clarkson's ambush had transformed into something entirely different. A demonstration of why Jolie had earned her reputation as one of the most formidable women in public life. The audience was no longer uncomfortable observers of an inappropriate interview. They were witnessing a masterclass in how to handle a hostile confrontation from someone with real experience in high-stakes situations. But Clarkson's response revealed that she was either completely unaware of how dramatically the situation had shifted, or she was too committed to her attack to recognize that she was now in serious danger. Real power? You want to talk about real power? Real power is having a daily television show that reaches millions of people. Real power is being able to expose the truth about celebrities who hide behind charity work while their personal lives are train wrecks. The studio fell into an almost supernatural quiet as Jolie processed what she had just heard. For several long seconds, she simply stared at Clarkson with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she was making calculations that would have consequences far beyond this television appearance. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made everyone present understand that something irreversible was about to happen. Kelly, you have just demonstrated something that I think your audience needs to understand clearly. You believe that having a television show gives you the right to attack people's families and exploit their personal struggles for entertainment. You believe that your platform exists to tear people down rather than build them up. And most importantly, you've shown everyone watching exactly what happens when someone mistakes cruelty for strength and thinks that being given a microphone makes them powerful. The words were delivered with surgical precision, each phrase designed to expose not just Clarkson's behavior, but the fundamental corruption of values that had led to this moment. The audience began to murmur among themselves, and for the first time since the confrontation began, their sympathies were clearly shifting toward Jolie and away from their host. Sensing that she was losing control of the narrative, Clarkson made one final, desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. You can lecture me all you want about power and values, Angelina, but at the end of the day, you're still sitting on my show, on my stage, answering to me. And if you don't like the questions I'm asking, there's the door. The challenge was delivered with a smugness that revealed Clarkson's complete misunderstanding of the situation she had created. She seemed to believe that because this was her show, broadcast from her studio, she maintained some kind of ultimate authority over how the confrontation would end. But her next words would prove to be the catalyst for an exit that would become legendary in television history, as Jolie prepared to demonstrate exactly what real power looked like when it decided it was finished being polite. What happened next would be replayed countless times across social media and analyzed by media experts for years to come. Jolie stood up slowly, deliberately, with the kind of controlled grace that had made her such a commanding presence on movie screens and in diplomatic settings around the world. The simple act of rising from her chair seemed to shift the entire energy of the studio, transforming her from a guest being attacked into something far more formidable. You know what, Kelly? You're absolutely right, Jolie said, her voice carrying a deadly calm that made everyone in the studio lean forward in anticipation. There is the door, and I am going to walk through it. But before I do, I want to make sure your audience understands exactly what they just witnessed here today. She turned away from Clarkson and faced the cameras directly, speaking with the same authority she had used when addressing the United Nations General Assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just saw was not an interview. What you just saw was a deliberate attempt to exploit and weaponize personal tragedy for entertainment purposes. You saw someone use her platform not to inform or inspire, but to tear down and destroy. The studio audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Clarkson tried to interrupt, but Jolie continued, without acknowledging her, speaking directly to the cameras with the kind of commanding presence that had made world leaders stop and listen when she spoke about global crises. In my work around the world, I've encountered many people who mistake cruelty for strength, who believe that causing pain somehow makes them powerful. I've sat across from warlords and corrupt officials who thought they could intimidate me with threats and personal attacks, They all learned the same lesson that I hope your host learns today. Clarkson's face had gone pale as she realized that her attempt to control the narrative had completely backfired. Angelina, you can't just... I can do exactly what I'm doing. Jolie cut her off with surgical precision. Because unlike you, I actually understand what real power looks like. Real power isn't using your platform to attack someone's children. Real power isn't exploiting personal struggles for ratings. Real power is knowing when to walk away from people who have demonstrated they're not worthy of your time or respect. The cameras captured every moment as Jolie removed her microphone with deliberate precision, the small actions somehow carrying enormous symbolic weight. You asked me earlier about courage, Kelly. Let me tell you what courage actually is. Courage is dedicating your life to helping people who can't help themselves. Courage is using whatever platform you have to amplify voices that would otherwise go unheard. Courage is standing up to bullies, whether they're in refugee camps or television studios. The audience began to applaud spontaneously, a slow clap that built into sustained applause as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Jolie acknowledged them with a slight nod before turning back to Clarkson one final time. But you know what courage isn't, Kelly? Courage isn't hiding behind a television show to attack people who actually do the work you're too cowardly to attempt yourself. Courage isn't weaponizing someone's personal struggles because you're threatened by their actual accomplishments. And courage certainly isn't what you demonstrated here today. Clarkson made one last, desperate attempt to regain control. You can't just walk out in the middle of a live interview. This is unprofessional. This is exactly what happens when someone mistakes having a microphone for having character, Jolie replied, her voice carrying the kind of finality that made it clear the conversation was over. Your audience deserves better than what you just gave them. The people whose stories I came here to tell deserve better. And, frankly, you deserve better than what you've become. The words hit like a physical blow. Clarkson's mouth opened and closed without sound, her usual quick wit completely abandoned in the face of someone who had systematically dismantled not just her attack, but the entire foundation of arrogance it was built upon. Jolie gathered her things with the same methodical precision she had used when preparing to leave hostile territories, each movement calculated and purposeful. I came here to talk about children who are surviving in impossible circumstances, who show more dignity and strength in a single day than some people demonstrate in their entire careers. Instead, I found someone who thinks entertainment value justifies cruelty. She paused at the edge of the stage, looking back one final time at Clarkson, who sat frozen in her chair, like someone who had just realized the magnitude of her miscalculation. I hope you take some time to think about what happened here today, Kelly. I hope you consider whether this is really the legacy you want to build with the platform you've been given. Because if this is who you've decided to become, then you've wasted something that could have been truly valuable. The studio doors opened, and Jolie walked toward them with the same confident stride she had used when entering war zones and disaster areas around the world. But before she reached the exit, she turned back to address the cameras one final time, her voice carrying across the stunned silence of the studio. To anyone watching who works with refugees, who advocates for children's rights, who believes that media should be used to build people up rather than tear them down, this is what it looks like when you refuse to accept abuse disguised as entertainment. This is what it looks like when you choose dignity over ratings. And this is what it looks like when real power decides it's finished being polite. The camera caught Clarkson's face in that moment, the expression of someone who had initiated what she thought would be an easy target, and instead found herself completely outclassed by someone who operated on an entirely different level. The host who had started the interview with such confidence now looked small, diminished, sitting alone on a stage that suddenly felt enormous. As Jolie reached the studio doors, she delivered her final statement without turning around, her voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. Good luck explaining this to your audience, Kelly. Good luck explaining it to your network. And good luck explaining it to yourself. The doors closed behind her with a decisive sound that seemed to echo through the studio. For several long seconds, Absolute silence reigned, as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. Clarkson sat motionless in her chair, staring at the empty seat across from her, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The audience remained frozen, uncertain whether to applaud, cheer, or simply sit in stunned silence. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath as the reality of the situation settled over everyone present. This wasn't just a celebrity walking out of an interview. This was a complete dismantling of everything Clarkson had tried to accomplish, delivered with the kind of precision that only someone with Jolie's experience in high-stakes confrontations could have managed. In the end, what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had transformed into something far more significant, a demonstration of the difference between manufactured television drama and genuine strength, between someone who talks about power and someone who actually wields it. The empty chair where Jolie had been sitting seemed to loom over the studio like a monument to everything Clarkson had lost in her failed attempt to diminish someone who had proven to be completely undiminishable. The confrontation was over, but its impact was just beginning. Within hours, the footage would be circulating across every platform on the internet, dissected and analyzed by millions of viewers who had witnessed something unprecedented in the history of daytime television. Kelly Clarkson had gotten the explosive content she was apparently looking for, but not in the way she had intended. Instead of exposing Angelina Jolie, she had exposed herself, and the cost of that revelation would be far greater than anything she could have imagined when the cameras first started rolling.